So people love checking in during week one, but where are they in month three, month six, when you're actually struggling? It's mad because grief doesn't end when the funeral does, but somehow people's messages do. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. Why it happens, why it doesn't mean that people don't care about you, and what you can do when the world does go quiet, when you don't get those messages, constant check-ins, people dropping food round, and it feels like you've basically just been left to your own devices again. So welcome back to Too Young To Grieve. I'm Luke, and today we're going to be talking about something every griever will experience, but no one really talks about or says out loud. And I've had a lot of requests about this one, and a lot of people asking me, can you cover this? Because I'm a bit confused. I don't know why it's happened. And I've seen comments on some of my posts of people saying the same thing. Why do people stop checking in after the first few weeks? And listen, people will show up heavily at the start. That is completely normal. That's a human response to someone losing someone close to them. But then, yeah, they will. They will slowly disappear. Not in a dramatic way, not in like, oh, they don't like me, they've abandoned me, you know, just in that slow, sort of awkward human way where life takes over. And in particular, for young people and us going through grief at a younger age, that is very, very normal. And I will say that from the off, that is very normal. If you're someone just literally starting out your grief journey, you can expect this to happen. And why I say that is because as young people, we're not really clued up on this type of stuff. You know, you're probably your first time going through a grief journey. Most of your friends and people around you probably have never been through grief. So they don't know what to say either. And that's by no fault of their own. And it's just expected. And it's what I've realized over my grief journey and why I'm talking about it today. Because I don't want you to be thinking that your friends don't care about you or that people don't care about you. But they just don't understand or know what to say. So we're going to cover that in more detail now so that you're not left thinking, did everyone get bored of my grief or what's going on here? Because the truth is way more complicated and a lot nicer and kinder than that. So let's get into it. What I like to call the attention window. So what I realized throughout my grief journey is that the first couple of weeks after you lose someone, you're basically like the main character in a movie or in everyone's group chat. You know, people you haven't spoken to in years will pop up and say, you know, mate, I just heard, I'm so sorry. Is there anything you need? And that's so nice. You're getting paragraphs, you know, voice notes, heart emojis, prayer hands, the lot. You're getting everything. It can be overwhelming, even. And at first, you greatly appreciate it. Of course you do. But also you're not really there because you're going through your grief, so you don't really know what's going on. You're not really processing anything like normal at the time. You're in shock, you know, your brain's somewhere completely in between being numb and confused. You're not processing the grief yet. You're processing, you know, just all these things coming at one time, you know, all these people checking in, all these people dropping things round, every second the doorbell ringing with someone coming round. And that's the first few weeks of grief. Then a few weeks pass, maybe the funeral's happened, family leave, go back to where they're from or where they're staying, or if they're not close to you, then they go back home. People go back to work. Like I say, the meals stop arriving. You know, at first you've got a whole basically supermarket in your house because everyone's bringing meals round and it's brilliant. You don't have to cook dinner for weeks. But then those stop, your phone stops buzzing, you know, and you're just suddenly sort of left to your own devices. And that's the part that no one sort of warned you about, you know? The real grief starts right when everyone else goes back to their normal life, as they should do. And you sort of sit there thinking, well, what's going on here then? Where's everyone gone? You sort of expect that that's just going to keep happening for the whole grief journey. And of course, that's not going to happen realistically. People have their own lives. But that silence and that period where it sort of just stops, that part is the hardest. It's not the chaos at the start, not all the messages, not everything happening at once. It's the silence that comes after it. You know, you've stopped hearing people say, "Hey mate, how you holding up? How's things? How's the family?" And you've started hearing nothing potentially. Of course, there will be people that will constantly keep checking in with you, and those are the people to definitely keep close and keep that close circle of people that constantly are, checking up even after the first few weeks. But people do have their own lives. You've got to remember that. So at first, you might think when you stop hearing things from people, maybe they forgot. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm boring them. Maybe I'm being over dramatic. What am I doing? Maybe my grief is inconvenient to them now. And I'd say that's the dangerous part, because what that does is silence in anything, in absolutely anything in life. Silence makes you create your own story in your head. But the honest truth is, most people do not disappear because they don't care. They disappear because they don't understand. Especially, like I say, at a young age, most people won't understand what you are actually experiencing. And most people would sort of just, as you do, sort of think, okay, they've lost someone and, crack on, get back to normal. But as we know, as people going through grief, that's just not what happens. The life before grief and the life after are two completely different things. But those people, yeah, will stop checking in because they don't understand potentially. But also, like I say, they've got their own things going on. People have their own problems going on. So they might not be able to constantly check in with you, and it's not their fault. So what they might think is, Luke seems to be handling it better now, even though it's probably just a facade and you're putting your grief mask on, like I say. Or I don't want to bring it up in case it makes him upset, it makes him cry, even though a lot of grievers will tell you, like, ask me about my dad, ask me about my mum, like, I want to tell you all about them type of thing. But people think they don't want to bring them up because it might upset you or it might bring back those memories. And that's if you take a step back as someone who's going through grief and you think from their perspective, that's pretty normal to think that, if I talk about the person they've lost, they're probably going to get upset, aren't they? So it is quite understandable. Or, like I say, life's just been hectic. Life's been hectic. I'll message him soon because, in a way, people might think that if I do message him, I want to be able to give my all. I don't want to just, turn up half-heartedly and just send him, you okay? Okay, yeah, I'm okay. All right, cool. And then just leave it. People want to make sure you are okay. So that's sort of potentially why people might not be checking in as much. And people forget that grief is long term, or people don't know that grief is long term. I didn't. I certainly didn't. And it's not, like I say, it's not out of malice, it's not anything like that. But just because their world didn't stop, even though yours did, remember that. So their world is not stopping as yours is. And you've got to understand that. And as much as it hurts, that is human nature. That's how we're wired. That's how things go. We've just got to crack on with life after it. So let's break it down gently why people do stop checking in, because I want you to really understand this so that you can, move on with your life and not take things personally when it comes to this aspect of the grief journey. So the first one is people assume that your healing will match their timeline. So what do I mean by that? Well, once the funeral's done, for example, people potentially will go, okay, well, it's over, That's the worst part of this, so it's got to be done. So that's what people think. Once that part is done, it's sort of back to normal, back to normality. But a lot of the time after the funeral, a few months down the line, is where the grief starts to really hit and you start to really think, oh, wow, that actually did happen. You start to process it a bit more. And that's when most people, if you are listening and you haven't gone through grief and you're just interested in this side of things, that's where, as someone wanting to check in on someone, those are the times to really, keep on top of things, because it's after the first few months that it really does start to hit and you process it a bit more. The second thing is that, like I say, they think bringing it up is going to remind you, is going to make you think bad things, want to cry, things like that. And if it does make you want to cry, then a lot of the time it's for good reason, getting it out, getting the emotions out rather than just holding them in. But it's sort of that these people think that bringing it up is going to remind you of something that you're going to ever forget, as if you're ever going to forget that person. So even if they do bring it up 2-3 years down the line, it will still bring those same sort of emotions. It might not be as raw and as heavy, but it will still bring emotion. So bringing it up, it doesn't remind us, like you say. It's just always there, essentially. It's never going to be forgotten, really. So trust me, as someone going through grief, you remember every day. They're not going to accidentally trigger you by bringing it up. And as someone listening who isn't going through grief, it's not going to do that. So don't worry. The third one, which I think is one of the most important things to touch upon, is that people have their own lives. People have their own problems. Yes, they might have not lost someone. They might not be going through grief, but they might have other problems. They might have other issues that you don't know about. So life catches up with people. That's the third reason. People have jobs, people have kids, people have breakups, people have bills, people lose pets, there's so many different things that can impact a person and impact their own mental health that you might not know that they're going through something. So they're trying to look after themselves and people around them and their families. And they also do want to check up on you, but they're just so overwhelmed and they've got their own things going on. So people have to return to their own rhythm, their own life, their own journeys. So it's not that they don't care, but we're human at the end of the day. We've got to default back to what our normal is and what we're doing and what's going to make us allow us to live our lives, essentially. So that's the third reason that I really think that you should take on board going through this process. The fourth one is that some people just don't know what to say anymore. At the start, it's kind of easy, sorry for your loss. I hope you're doing okay. Hope the family's doing okay. If you need me, I'm here. Then after that, people kind of panic. Months later, what do I say? Like, they overthink what they're going to say. Some people don't say nothing at all because they don't know what to say. And they avoid saying the wrong thing. And then, like I say, that leads to people who sometimes saying nothing. So that's another reason. People don't actually know what to say to someone who's going through grief. So if you take a step back and sort of think about that, sometimes you can understand it a bit more because you're just like, well, okay, yeah, it's a bit tough. What do you even say? But for that person, it's just a simple, look, I know it's tough. I know that, you're going through something very tough, but I'm here for you. And that's all you sort of have to say. You can say, I might not know exactly how you're feeling, but I'm here for you. And that's all it is, just a checkup, just see how they are and move on. It doesn't have to be anything overcomplicated, a long-winded message, just something to let them know that you're there and you're still there for them 3 months later. And sometimes people think, as the fifth point, that distance equals strength. And that is kind of applied to pretty much a load of things in life. The classic, I didn't want to bother you, mate. You seem to be coping quite well, so I thought I'd just leave you to it. Yeah, I wish. So you're kind of thinking, if only you knew what I was actually feeling. So that is one thing that I want to say, that people don't take like the feeling that someone is just doing okay because it's been a few weeks. It doesn't happen like that. So yeah, if you can, drop your mate a message. If you can, even if they're not going through grief, just drop your mate a message anytime. Check in with them because you never know what people are going through. But in relation to grief, yeah, it doesn't end. It gets easier to carry, but it doesn't end. So yeah, keep checking in on someone who's gone through a big loss in their life. And what can you do? That's the next part. What can you do as someone going through grief? Like I say, I always like to take my experience and what I've learned and what's helped me and pass it on to you to make your journey easier. So you don't have to go through potentially the hardest parts of grief on your own and you've got someone guiding you. Now, let me just grab the charger. This is very important because I don't want this episode to, as always, I don't want it to just be relatable. I want it to be useful as well. So that's why I always give you tips and tricks and things that you can take on board and move forward with. There's no point me just waffling and talking at you about my experience and not giving you anything useful to go forward with. So let's get into it. Stop expecting people to know what you need. It's like anything in life. If you're in a relationship, for example, your partner can't read your mind and know that, you want a cheese toastie at 12 o'clock at night. People can't read your mind in your grief journey. It's the same thing. Most of these people genuinely do want to help you, but they're just not sure how or what they can do for you. So you can do that. So what do I mean? If you're feeling up to it, message someone. Say, it's been a bit of a rough week, I'll be honest, mate. Do you fancy going for a walk and grabbing a coffee? That goes a long way for both you and for that person, because I promise you that most people, if they physically can, will straight away drop what they're doing and say, yeah, look, listen, mate, I'm here for you. Let's go. What do you want? Flat white, cappuccino, latte? They'll be there. Trust me. And it's not dramatic. It's just honest. You're just telling people, look, I am struggling a bit. It is a bit rough, this. I'm not really sure what's going on here, but I just need to get out of my head and just go for a walk. Or do you fancy going down the pub? Or do you fancy going to watch the football? Do you fancy playing golf? Do you fancy, doing a high rocks workout? I don't know. Whatever you want to do, whatever you feel comfortable doing, that's the main thing on your grief. Whatever you want to do and how you want to process it and what works for you, do that with them and they'll be there. The next one is a real one, I think. Through grief, I have learnt massively that in life you need to build a small circle. A circle of people that are real, that are going to be there for you no matter what, that will support you no matter what. And that's what you need to build in life and for your grief. So, like I said, loads of people will show up in the first week of your grief, because they've heard something really bad happen to you and they'll drop you a sorry for your loss message and things. And it's very kind. But that close circle are the people that are going to be there for you months later, years later. And that's what you need to build and you need to find as soon as possible in your grief journey, because those are your people. Don't chase the massive numbers that message you at the start. Just keep close and understand who those 3, 4, 5 people are that you can message at 1 o'clock at night or whenever. But those are the people that you need to build that circle around and know that you can trust them with anything that you tell them, and they'll be there for you with anything. The third thing is let people be human. People forget. People choose comfort. A lot of people choose comfort in this life, as we know. People avoid hard things, hard topics. It's not personal, it's human. No one wants to talk about deep things a lot of the time, especially loss and death. So, if you take a step back, like I say, I always like to view this journey from the perspective of someone who's never experienced grief in their life. And if honestly you weren't going through grief, you'd probably fall into the same patterns. Think about when potentially you didn't know how the grief felt and someone you knew went through grief. How did you respond to that? It's a human response, human nature to not want to talk about things like that. People often will laugh in serious situations. They will avoid hard topics. They won't speak about things like this. So people are human. Just let them be human. Let them do what they need to do. Because if you didn't go through grief, you probably wouldn't know how to react either. So you got to remember that as well. The fourth one is, I think this applies to a lot of life as well, being able to be with yourself and learning to do things on your own. So this point is learn to check in with yourself. It hurts, but it is the truth. Sometimes on your grief journey, you're going to be on your own. You're going to be alone. You might be lonely. And sometimes you just have to be your own consistent support system. you've got to do things and build that mentality to cope with your grief sometimes on your own, because someone's not always going to be there for you, and you are going to be on your own. A lot of the time, most of the thoughts that we think, most of the things that we do will be on our own in our life. So sit down and ask yourself, how am I actually doing today? Take care of your mind and your body. How am I actually doing today? Whether that's journaling. What's triggering me? What do I need today? Do I need to go to the gym? Do I need to do an intense workout? Do I need to get out and about? Or do I just need to lie on the sofa and listen to some songs that we used to listen to? Because what that does is it stops the silence from turning into self-blame. Stops you from blaming yourself for things or not doing things or why am I feeling this way? It stops you from doing that because you're giving your mind and the thoughts that you're thinking in this grief journey, which are very heavy and constantly going at the start, a place to go. And then the last one is accept new support when it shows up. Sometimes the best people in your grief journey, I promise you, aren't the ones that you'd expect. So think about that. Because when you go through grief, you learn to view life from a different perspective. And I'm sure that a lot of you can relate to that. And it might lead you to new people, or those new people will be led towards you. New friends, new communities, online communities, people who've been through similar things, who understand what you're going through. People who get it without you having to explain is a big, big thing. And I even saw someone talking about this, that broken men or broken people in general, but this was specific to men, are sometimes the strongest ones. And the person was saying that those broken people, you can tell that they're broken. And that was crazy to me, but it also is kind of true. When you have a conversation with someone, how they view the world and how they view life often gives it away that they've potentially been through grief. And like I say, with grief, it's not just losing someone to death. It can be losing someone in a very traumatic way. It can be losing something in a very traumatic way. And those people that have been through something like that, the broken people, shall we say, which I don't believe you're broken, but that's what the person said anyway. Those people who've been through similar things to you can be some of the best support in your journey. So let them in. Even if it feels weird at first, even if you're like, I don't even know this person, or I didn't really know this person, you will get a lot closer to people who've been through it too. Trust me. So that's what I would say as a few pointers of what you can do in terms of this situation of the people checking in and not checking in and all that side. Don't take it to heart. Do not take it to heart, this stuff. But this is the perspective shift that I want you to walk away with. The people who stopped checking in did not stop caring. They just returned to a life that didn't change. So I'll say that again. The people who stopped checking in didn't stop caring, but they just returned to a life that didn't change. But yours did. So remember that. Your life changed, but other people have to get back to theirs. That hasn't. So your loss isn't a reflection of their love. Your grief isn't a burden. You're not asking for anything unreasonable by still hurting and still processing the grief. And that silence around grief doesn't mean that you're alone. It just means that grief is misunderstood, which it is if you've never been through it. And it's okay to remind people sometimes. It's okay to tell them and to say, look, I'm having a bit of a tough one. That's not neediness. That's just honesty. And people would much rather you be honest with them and tell them how you are feeling so that they can help you. So if you're listening to this episode thinking, yeah, you know what? This Luke guy actually talks a bit of sense sometimes. I agree. Everyone did disappear after month 2. I hear you. I hear that. I know people will disappear. I know people won't check in as much as they did at the start. And it is one of the most painful, confusing parts of this whole process. But it's not a sign you're unloved. It's not a sign that you're forgotten. And it's definitely not a sign your grief should be over. Tell you that much. It's just a sign that people are human. They slip, they forget, they get wrapped up in their own storms, their own problems. And you're just learning to survive yours. So if no one's checked in recently, consider this your own check-in. How are you doing? Like really, how are you doing? Because you deserve support, you deserve consistency. And even if the world around you's gone a bit quiet after the initial period of grief and loss, you're not on your own. Remember that. So I hope that this episode did make you feel a bit less alone. And if it did, I'd love for you to share it with someone else who might need to hear it too. Or even someone who used to check in and maybe forgot to help them, give them a little nudge, give them a little reminder. Because it would open their eyes massively to understand how this part of the process happens and works. So please do share. Feel free to tag me on any social medias. Feel free to follow the pages. Feel free to follow my page at Too Young To Grieve, or my personal at Alfano 11 for more honest conversations about grief, mental health, and how you can navigate this very tough period of life and life in general. So if you want more honest conversations like this, please follow the podcast, subscribe, and just remember, you're doing way better than you think. You're way stronger than you think. And just keep going, because you're going to be okay.